Brian Kohberger, the Monroe County native who's accused of stabbing and killing 4 University of Idaho students to death in their off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho, back in 2022. You probably have heard much about this case so far.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Not much is known about Brian Kohberger's backstory. I mean, it is more than a decade and a half, arguably, that we don't have a terrible amount of information. We know about a heroin episode. We know he was bullied, but what about some other anecdotes and incidents? So I was able to find something from the Pocono Record, the local newspaper, that describes a particular incident where a school district monitor, Kathleen Piccolo, felt that something was wrong. She had kind of an asthma attack and nearly died, and Kohberger was sort of in the immediate environment. What did he do in that situation? Why did he appear in the paper as a result of that incident? So 4 years before becoming the prime suspect in a quadruple murder, a 24-year-old Brian Kohberger was accused of being involved in saving someone's life. According to the article in the Pocono Record, it was late in the morning on Saturday, December 1st, when Pleasant Valley School District Monitor Kathleen Piccolo felt that something was wrong. She was about to have kind of a health episode. And so, yes, Kohberger was there. He was on the job doing security on a Saturday morning. The article goes on to say, while patrolling the hallways of the high school, she was having trouble breathing and it was quickly getting worse. But thanks to the presence and quick action of a security guard, not Brian Kohberger, Louis Fuentes, and his fellow co-workers, Piccolo was able to survive a medical emergency that could have led to disaster. So right there in the hallways of a school, this lady collapsed, a little bit of an elderly lady, and the security guards basically ran to her aid. And so according to Fuentes, she was doing her rounds, walking around the school, and out of nowhere she started screaming out his name. Louis, come help me. Louis, help me, help me. Didn't scream Kohberger's name. And Fuentes said he found her in the hallway and she couldn't breathe. She was struggling to breathe. Piccolo asked Fuentes to retrieve her asthma pump from her coat in the main office, and you would think that that would be a fairly straightforward thing. She's having an asthma attack, get the asthma pump, job done. But he didn't want to leave her alone, and perhaps that was a mistake, but it was at that moment that Kohberger enters the picture, because Fuentes' co-workers arrive on the scene, and then he dashed to her office. But by the time he returned, it looked like the situation had deteriorated, and Piccolo had sort of turned purple. Now, by this stage, Kohberger, as I say, himself was on the scene, and you would imagine as a jogger and a kickboxer, he was the best candidate to sprint to the office to collect the pump. But instead, Fuentes, a big dude, hustled to collect it himself. Now, I suppose if the office was, a few hundred yards away, then that would make sense. But it actually seems like the office was right there, right? It was really just a couple of yards away, and anyone could have really gone to collect it. But it is interesting that Fuentes didn't ask Kohberger to get it himself. Also on scene was the athletic director of the school, Jack Percy. And then there's a reference now for the first time to Kohberger's name, Brian Kohberger. And then he said, when they arrived, I started running to get the asthma pump. By the time I came back, it was like seconds. She was purple. I was trying to get her attention. Kathleen, wake up, but did nothing. And again, one does wonder, what were Kohberger and Percy doing with Piccolo? How were they trying to render aid? That part is not sort of mentioned in the story. But one does wonder, what did Kohberger do during this emergency situation? You kind of get the idea that other people were being quite assertive because they sort of mentioned, rather than him being mentioned in the article. So, for example, we find out that Percy, the athletic director, he called 911, and then Fuentes told Kohberger to retrieve the school's AED unit. And what that is an automated external defibrillator, and that's often used to revive someone who's had a sudden cardiac arrest. And that's probably what he thought, that is what Fuentes thought had happened to this school district monitor. And of course, that isn't what happened. She was simply having an asthma attack, not a heart attack. Anyway, so Fuentes sort of sends Kohberger on a kind of wild goose chase in terms of that emergency. He's run off to retrieve the AED unit, and presumably that wasn't very easy or straightforward to find. And meanwhile, Fuentes went to work performing CPR. Apparently, the situation was intense. It was sort of like a life and death situation. And the article says that Fuentes knew that her life was literally in his hands. But he kept his cool and he focused on Piccolo. And it was during this whole process, trying to perform CPR, that Fuentes saw a registered nurse, Lisa Favata, and her husband Justin coming down the hall. And so you have a situation here where, while Kohberger was somewhere else, the nurse and Fuentes worked together to bring Piccolo back. According to the article, Kohberger returned with the AED just as emergency personnel, so it does seem like he was gone a little while, arrived on the scene, emergency medical services. Piccolo was examined in the ambulance before taken to St. Luke's Monroe campus for further treatment. And it turned out that she was going to make it, she was going to be okay. So you sort of have a situation where Kohberger is at the center of a medical emergency, but he doesn't end up doing anything particularly useful. He shows no leadership, and ultimately when the story comes out, the hero is someone else. He is not mentioned very much at all. His picture is not in there, and there's not really much really about him. He's very much a peripheral figure. And instead, Fuentes gets all the accolades. He even gets an award. And so he's all over the newspapers. He says, "Thank God I spoke to her the same day and no broken ribs." He says, usually when you do CPR, you break ribs. And he said, everything was perfect. What was supposed to happen by the grace of God happened the right way. So you have this bizarre situation where Brian is kind of a witness, kind of standing around, where he actually sees someone almost lose her life, and then he sees other people rapidly doing whatever they need to do, including him, but other people as well, literally trying to save her life. And if you think about it, that does seem to be something that inspires him, because sometime after that he applied to become a police officer. You may get the sense that he saw his role as someone who wanted to protect other people. And you can imagine that this was one of the most significant events in his life, where he almost sort of got his name in a news headline, right? Little to know what, and maybe even this incident made him think about getting a certain amount of attention based on someone being in an emergency or critical situation. In other words, you can get into the paper because you lose your life or almost lose your life, or you can get into the paper for saving someone's life. So also in the news coverage, and Kohberger likely read everything about this, it said, since that fateful Saturday, Fuentes has received an avalanche of praise from co-workers, friends, students, and strangers alike. So again, if you, someone who's a bit of an outsider, a bit of a loner, you wanting some acknowledgement, wanting to people to think that you're smart or you special in some way, well, this is one way of getting it, right? And so even the school kids at the high school, according to Fuentes, they come to me every day since this happened, and they say, "Oh my God, Louis, thank you." They hug me, they give me cookies, they buy me a donut, right? And how does Kohberger feel within that situation? You He's on the periphery and he sees his co-worker getting all of this love and attention, is a hero of society, his co-worker. Fuentes even received a commendation for his actions, according to the article, highlighting his swift and professional actions, again, of Officer Fuentes, who quickly evaluated and controlled the scene and rendered medical aid to Ms. Piccolo by performing CPR. Ms. Piccolo received the aid necessary and potentially saving her life. Officer Fuentes' actions reflect the professional values and positive impact of the Pleasant Valley School District Police and Security Department. Pleasant Valley School District is fortunate to have Officer Fuentes as part of our team. And not really much mention of Kohberger. He is mentioned in passing, but the real hero of the story is Fuentes. Even so, it's likely Kohberger also received a little extra sunshine out of that experience. And one can imagine how proud his own family and friends were of him, and that he probably mentioned the story as a little feather in his cap as well. And possibly because this was a positive experience, he wanted another positive experience. He wanted to be a policeman or someone who could save other people and do good. Fuentes did go on to say, look, it was all just part of the job, and he said anyone else on his team would and could have done the same. And you do have to wonder, if Kohberger was alone, what would he have done? Would he have been able to save this lady? And I suppose it could just as easily have been Brian's photo and name and story in the paper, and maybe he thought about that. One wonders whether he thought the same thing. That could have been me. Did he regret not playing a more effective role in saving the life of this woman and getting the sort of recognition Fuentes got instead? We must also look at this story in the context of this idea of Brian as pure evil. You know, one actually has a sense that Brian was trying to do good, but somehow came out of these experiences feeling either scorned or kicked to the curb or sort of not acknowledged. Had those around him shown appreciation for his efforts, perhaps Brian would have been less prickly. Perhaps he would have wanted to be more part of society rather than antisocial. Maybe the sense of antisocial sort of alienation that he was getting, that sense that he was getting, led to him doing these very antisocial acts. But one does wonder if he was the security guard instead of Fuentes. Could that have changed his entire fate, his entire destiny, where he saw himself as the hero? He saw himself as the good guy, and that was sort of carved in stone, right? That I've got a heart of gold, and remember that, and maybe that would have anchored him to a particular sense of self. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but what I do want to do is go even deeper into his backstory and to the sort of cultural separation between rural Pennsylvania and Washington State University, as well as the University of Idaho. What felt different if you went from the one place to the other? And could that have had any impact, any influence in the psychology that was being manufactured, that was brewing, because of this dislocation from going from the one place to the other? Did it hinder the psychology that was taking place, that was progressing, or did it facilitate it? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.